All right, and welcome back to B-Roll Redux. How's it
Hey, good
going,
morning,
David?
Dave. How are you? We all
I am
survived.
doing good.
There was Winter Storm Enzo, and I take note. They shouldn't have named a storm after the founder of Ferrari. That's wrong. Poor
I mean,
Enzo.
it was probably the most snow that we've had here in probably over 20 years. Let's put it
Yeah,
that way.
it was. They say Baytown got 4 to 5 inches of snow. It's like we got a couple here in West Houston. It was nice.
Yeah, we got
Sticky
probably like
covered.
three. We had it
Yeah,
pretty piled up. You know,
right. Kids
it
were
was
having
so
fun.
nice out there. It's like, oh man, I wish I had something to shoot out there. It
Right,
always looks nice when it's snowing. Then
right. It's nice and bright, right?
day after, 2 days after, it all looks like trash.
Right.
Everything's all sloshed, everything's all half covered, and it's like, oh man.
Right. So a couple. Matter of fact, Lou Savarese posted a picture on Facebook of a snowman he built with his daughter. Had a mullet.
Yeah, we built a little tiny one.
He did.
We're done playing around outside in the snow.
Oh, I had work to do. We
Yeah,
stayed.
it's like, oh, it's too cold. My hands,
Right.
yeah.
We don't have the clothes for it because it's never happened.
Oh
It
yeah.
never
I
happened.
mean, we have thick jackets, but I'm not gonna bust out mittens and
Yeah, Sean lost my
beanies
only
and
pair of gloves
stuff.
on him. He
It's
played
just
football
too
in the
cold.
snow.
But the one good thing about it, when it is cold out there, you get to catch up on some movies, and hopefully you
Right.
get to catch up on some ones. Today, I got one of it's not one of my favorite, but as a kid, I really enjoyed it.
Right.
And it is a special type of movie that you have to be in the mood for, and I think you have to watch with family, right?
Right.
And it's going to be 1986's Labyrinth,
Right.
starring David Bowie and Jennifer Connelly.
Right.
And this is
Different
the first
spelling,
time
but
you've
same
seen it,
last
right?
name. Huh?
This is the first time you've seen this movie as well, right?
Yeah. First time. Well, I I watched it. A lot of scrubbing. It was tough for me to get through. It was tough.
And like I
But
said, it's better for kids.
right. No,
And
60-year-old man.
if you're going to watch it as an adult, it's actually better to know a little bit about it.
Right.
Because, like what you were saying to me earlier, it's like, well, you didn't know what you were getting into, and you just couldn't find that foothold.
Right, right, right. It's hard to, like where do I get on, right?
Right. It's a Jim Henson movie. He directed this movie, and this was actually his last directing project that he did. Um, and it is a lot deeper than surface level. Surface
Mhm.
level. It's a Jim Henson product. It's got puppets. It's got it's fantasy. It's a hero journey story.
Right, right,
But there's a lot of deep, emotional and psychological aspects to the story
right,
that really
right.
don't get thrown. They're not thrown in your face at all. You'd have to be, pay attention. And this is where, if you're an adult and you're going in there and it's like, okay, look beyond the layers, what's going on,
Mhm.
you know, and then you see something a little bit different. As a kid, no, I didn't bother with any of that. As a kid, I
Right.
just, I enjoyed
Looking
Jim
at the
Henson, I
puppets.
enjoyed the Muppets,
Right.
I enjoyed all these other projects, except for maybe Dark Crystal, I never really got into. But this one is like, oh yeah, I enjoyed it. Puzzles, riddles,
Right. And then the
know.
mechanics of the puppets is always amazes me. How seamless everything seems with the puppets. And it just behind the scene, that's what amazes me about the whole project with Jim Henson and the story itself of the story. Yeah. Just amazing what they're able to
Oh
pull
yeah,
off.
during one of the scenes, where David Bowie's doing the Magic Dance song,
Mhm.
there's 48 puppets with 52 puppeteers working on that scene.
Right, with the hand, yeah, yeah.
And that
It,
scene looked amazing. The only time that, I get thrown out because of, the visuals was when Jennifer Connelly was having the scene with the puppets that were able to move their heads off and they were doing, like want to have a good time, that kind of
right,
song.
right,
You can tell where it's like, man, they use like rudimentary early days, kind of like green screen technology, or, the background where you're trying to double expose, but you're cutting
Mhm.
out, rotoscoping the actors and the puppets, and it didn't pull off with the technology that they had, back then, especially now with, high dev and bigger screens. When you watch it on a little 13-inch screen, four
Right.
by three, you probably don't notice it too much. But nowadays, it's like, yeah, it's like you see, the magic behind that filmmaking.
Hmm.
And but other than that, it's like, man, everything else was like practical. You have like these big creatures, that the suit, weighed 100 pounds at the very beginning, and he
Hmm.
told him like, hey, you gotta cut that back.
Right,
They
right,
cut it
right,
down to 75 pounds, but that's still a
right. It
lot.
still took two people. And it didn't say it took two people to manage it, just to operate the
It,
darn thing.
well, it took like three people to do like the animatronics of the mouths.
Right.
Brian Hinton and a couple other people were doing that. And then it took two actors in the suit, and they kept on swapping, so they didn't have to do it through the whole, every frame and every take. It's like, hey, once they get tired, we'll bring in this actor and they'll
Right.
do the performance.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, a lot of limitations when you have to do with all that practicality, and like, man, it would they did a fantastic job with the
Hmm.
visuals, you know.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. And how lifelike they look. It's spooky how lifelike they look.
Oh
The
yeah. I remember seeing, it could be, a little bit scary for younger kids, just because some of them, those goblins look really, really good,
Mhm.
especially in the very beginning, and she's about to say the wish to take the kid away, and it's just basically the whole frame is just filled with, goblin heads, and they're kind of like waking up. It's like, did she say?
Right, right, right.
It's like, oh man, those little tiny creepy heads remind me of those, like, those balls, as when I was a kid, that were just made of like creepy faces. They were kind of
Hmm.
squish balls,
Right, right.
you know. It's like, oh man, he did such a good job with the puppets, and like I said, it was hard to get your foot in, and if you didn't know what was going on going into it, it, it kind of fell short for some people, and the box office showed it. The cost for this movie was 25 million, and we've talked about other films before in the 80s, that, hey, this is pretty high. I mean, I think Die Hard was less money than this, right?
Mhm.
Um,
That's true, right? Yeah.
yeah, 25 million is a lot. We talked about several movies. I mean, the movie we talked about in the previous episode, that was what, 15 years ago, 10 years ago, they only spent 9 million ish,
Mhm.
5 million they spent on Dale and
Right.
Tucker, so 25 million, that's pretty decent sized budget, for back in the 80s.
Mhm.
And worldwide box office was only 35 million.
Right.
So it was a flop. It was produced by, or at least distributed by TriStar Pictures, which I always
Mhm.
enjoyed because I enjoyed Pegasus coming and the
Right.
pyramid, and they always had a good logo. Um, and there was a lot of similar type movies, but I think they actually knew their audience better. Let's put it that way. We're talking about like, Willow was out by then. The film Legend was actually being shot at the same time. Never Ending Story, and this is, I always thought it was very similar to Never Ending Story
Okay. Right.
because it was about that imagination, or is that story within the story that was going on. Um, so if that fit this archetype of the fantasy story, modern story, fairy tale kind of going on,
Hmm.
you know, but it it didn't really pick up. And like I said, if you really sit it, especially as an adult, if you know semi what's going on and you're able to look beyond the surface, you can see something deeper in the story that you can appreciate. But they weren't able to do that off the cusp. And that's why it failed at the box office, but it became a cult classic later because people
Hmm.
on rewatching go, hey, yeah, there's something else more
So,
going on
so
here.
yeah. So yeah. Let's rehash it. Right. Let's look at this again. Right.
Yeah, yeah. And every time I look at it, I get something new, and I had to do a little research on some of the other things and fan theories about the characters. But at the heart of it, it is about coming of age story,
Hmm.
growing up, and over the last several decades, the growing up, coming of age stories, they're always about, hey, we need to get laid before we go to college or something like
Right,
that,
right,
right?
right, right.
But this was, more family oriented. It's very simple. It's about this young girl who's, 16. She's still uh, very much attached to her, her childhood imagination. She's still got all of her childhood toys in her room. She lives with her father, her stepmother, and her half brother. Um, so when she has to babysit, she's not really happy about it, of
Right.
course. And the baby was keep on crying, and she had this story that was tied to her childhood, and that story is called Labyrinth. It has Goblin King. Goblin King's played by David Bowie. Yeah. So what she goes through is basically the story that she was reading when she was a kid.
Is that what is that what she was reading in the park?
Yeah, and that's what she was reading at the park. It was she was still, very fixated on her, her own imagination, her childhood innocence.
Right.
And when, she couldn't get the baby to stop crying, the part in the book would, it was like, well, she would wish the Goblin King would take the kid away, and that would make her happy.
Right.
So she makes a wish, and that's what happens. The baby,
Right.
gets taken
Mhm.
away.
Right. Right. Right.
And she changes her mind, so she has to go through the labyrinth and get to the center, to in 12 hours or 13 hours, however long it took, before time runs out to save her brother, you know.
So, so in here's it would probably wouldn't sell as well. So just wake up, watch a kid, and be grateful for the things you have. You live in a nice house, and the parents will love you.
Yeah.
So just shut up and do it.
Yeah.
That doesn't make good storytelling.
Well, it's also, that childhood where it's like, even if it wasn't a half brother, half sibling, right?
Right.
It's
Well, it's
that
still going to be.
they're
I
the
don't want to do
baby. They're
this.
getting all the attention.
Right. Of
She
course.
comes in, it's like, she goes in her room and one of her toys are missing, one of her stuffed animals are missing, and sit in with the baby, and that is something like an older kid can relate to, right?
Right. Right.
Um, and yeah, I mean, the story was written by Terry Jones from, Monty Python.
Yeah. Yeah. You told me I didn't like, and it was interesting. I didn't know that. I love Monty Python,
Yeah.
and that's some humor you really have to pay attention to. It
Oh
just
yeah. Yeah. Those guys were like what, Harvard graduates
right, right,
or Oxford, yeah,
right.
all those Monty
They're
Python
smart
guys
in
went
their
to like
yeah.
those Ivy
I
League
love yeah,
schools. Um, he wrote the original draft. They had to rewrite it, quite a bit, but they had to bring him back to put in the jokes because by the time
mhm,
that it was rewritten, the jokes were gone. The main thing that he didn't like about the script was that they actually showed the center of the labyrinth before she got there. Which, I mean, you got to. I mean, the Goblin King's sitting in his castle, and if that's the center
right,
of the labyrinth, you got to show David Bowie before the end of the movie. I mean,
mhm, right,
what's the point of having David Bowie there if we're not going to
right,
have him
right.
there and have him sing? And I enjoyed the music. I always enjoyed David Bowie. He's
Oh
got
yeah, I like
a
it.
good
Yeah, I like
soothing
it. Yeah,
voice.
I saw him in where did I saw him in the Woodlands years ago. He was in the Woodlands years ago, many
Yeah, he
old now.
passed away, what, 2 years ago?
Yeah, yeah. This is yep. Yeah, I've always liked him, and just I guess the over the top of him. I mean, even though he was over the top in his own world, but seeing him in the costume was like, well, I did because I didn't know anything about the movie.
I mean, yeah, he was definitely wearing a, a glam rock.
Right, yeah, to the nth degree, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean that's 80s, and if you don't
right,
like the 80s style, you definitely ain't gonna like that.
right. Well, I grew up in the 80s, just high school. This is 86. Where was I in 86? I think living in Dallas or back in, I don't know. I never watched the movie until now, and but it was interesting. It was
Yeah.
interesting, you know.
I mean, you'll have to watch it again one time,
Right.
and go in there with a fresh mind, looking at the details, you
Like I did
know.
with the Turtles, the Turtle movie. I mean, when I watched it again, it was like it's a really good movie. You understand what's going on, but I guess it wasn't. You know, yeah, I'll have to rewatch it.
Oh yeah, and the jokes are jokes the kids can get to. I mean, there's a scene that's basically all fart jokes. They don't say it's
Right,
farting, but it's like the bog of eternal stench, and they just
right.
have it just makes farting noises when they
I
go
think I
under
woke up
rocks
where
and stuff.
the ball drops and she thanks him for dropping a ball in the goo. Yeah, I
Yeah,
think I
that was the
woke up
bog
during
of
that
eternal
part.
stench. Yeah, you know,
Oh, it's still going right.
yeah. There was a story about the royal premiere, in the
Oh
UK.
yeah, I saw that. Right,
Yeah, and King Charles III, was the only one in the theater laughing during this.
right,
He understood a good fart joke, right?
right,
It's not like our fart jokes where, we're very blatant about it. It's
right,
like, hey, that's just what the bog was doing because it's bubbling, it's emitting
right.
gas, and that was Monty Python guy. They knew how
Right.
to write jokes without it just being blatant,
Yes,
right?
subtly. Yeah, yeah, gruesome. Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, Jennifer Connelly did such a great job. I mean, she was only 14 when she did this,
Hmm.
and to carry a film like this was pretty ostentatious.
Right. Yeah, yeah, pretty much she's by herself except the beginning and end.
Yeah.
She's by herself and able to handle it with
I mean,
inanimate.
Hoggle, there was an actress under Hoggle's, suit and makeup.
Right.
One of the reasons why, the character was always, you know, breathing deep and making noises when they're not delivering dialogue, because he had to have the mouth open so she could see.
Right.
Those are those limitations. It's like, hey, yeah, I mean, you have this heavy suit, you have this, whole puppetry, headpiece. So it's like, well,
Right.
yeah, where's the eye holes for the actress underneath it?
Right.
It's like, well, you
Open
gotta see
mouth.
to the mouth, and we've seen the turtles, right? Where it's like you
Right.
open up their mouth, it's like that's where they're
Right.
looking. They're
Would you
not
please
looking
say
for the
something? I can't
eyeballs.
breathe in here.
Yeah, and that actress that did Hoggle did great. It's like you couldn't tell.
Right.
I don't know if she delivered the voice for him. I think she just delivered the performance. But that was a crazy performance. I mean,
Hmm.
Hoggle took like a swan dive off a pretty high thing and just landed flat on the ground.
Right.
It's like, there was some really good physicality in there. Is it better than something like the other, fantasy fairy tale stories that we talked about, like Never Ending Story, The Princess Bride, you know,
That's a good one. Yeah.
I don't think so, but it's got that Jim Henson charm to it. And you can tell it's got that kind of like that British humor wit from the Monty Python, Terry
Right.
Jones. Um, and a lot of people, that British humor is kind of off. And maybe that's what threw, the box office.
Right. Yeah. It's definitely it's dry humor and it's definitely in a class of its own. And I used to watch British TV with my mom, Monty Python and a couple other sitcoms, and you really have to pay attention because it's smart humor.
Right.
It's not just crude. You really have to pay attention to the humor. And
And of course, some of it, they had to tone it down so the kids can actually get
right,
get something.
right,
But a lot of the jokes were, you know, the doorknobs that I can't hear you because the doorknob handle went through the guy's ears.
right,
you know, so he's very, kind of like, uppity, complaining. And the one guy had it in his mouth and he doesn't want it back in his mouth. So what do you do? It's like, oh, she closes his nose so he can't breathe. So you open his mouth and put the doorknob back. Very good kind of witty humor that kind of kind of passes off to the kids. Maybe they don't know completely what's going on with the
right,
humor, but the adult can like go, that's funny. Yeah. You know?
right. Well, yeah, they see the action of the joke, but not don't understand the context of the joke.
Right.
They see the mechanics of it, but not the actual the yeah.
The riddles with the guys saying, one guy lies, and the other guy always tells the truth, and with the guy with the hat, the bird for a hat. It's
Hmm.
like very witty, kind of dry humor that goes on in this conversation that goes over kids' heads. But as an adult, you're like, you get that little chuckle, right?
Hmm. Yeah,
Or,
it's something for the kids, for the
the
parents to
little
take the kids.
worm at the beginning is like, hey, don't go that way. It's like, God, she shouldn't have went that way. She would have went right to the castle.
Right. It's it always make a right turn, right?
Yeah.
Turning
Yeah, she
right
always
turn.
she was always making rights, taking this right, choosing the right door, choosing the other right door. Um, yeah, it was so funny. And the problem is with the flop, it really got Jim Henson down. This was his like last directing project because of this flop, you know. And it was produced by George Lucas. George
Hmm.
Lucas didn't want to do any publicity, for the film because he didn't want to take, any kind of spotlight
Spotlight away.
away from
Yeah.
Jim Henson, but that probably hurt
Well, that's what I
the
was saying.
film.
It's probably like we said before. Maybe it was he saw the writing on the wall. Said, "Look, I'll do this for you, buddy, but I don't want nothing to do with it. Don't put my name anywhere."
I mean, I don't know. I mean, George Lucas has made, some not that great movies,
Right.
and choices. I really think, he just, he was such a big name at this time.
Right.
86, he's only like a year or two removed from what 83 was the last, Return of the Jedi.
Yeah.
So he was still high up there, and
Yeah.
he at this time he's probably making like, Indiana Jones's. So George Lucas's name is still pretty big,
Right.
and not to use him in PR, it's just a disservice to your project. You
Yeah.
know, I don't think he would. I mean, he was good friends with Jim Henson.
Yeah.
If the reason why, if he didn't believe in the project, he would probably just told him, it's like, hey, yeah, my name will be on there, but I'm not going to do anything for you. Like, nah,
Yeah.
I don't think that. Well, let's take a little break, and then when we come back, we'll continue our conversation. All right, and we are back, and we're
We
talking
are back.
about Jim Henson's 1986 Labyrinth.
The behind
And
the scenes look. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it is a very unique film, and it's like we're not gonna probably see anything kind of like this, in quite some time. But it is such a deep, film, about metamorphosis, it's about coming of age, about growing up, it's about childhood imagination, it's about responsibilities. Um, and even going deeper, it's about, this young girl and how she depicts, you know, reality and how her reality has been um changed by her experiences. Like I said, she's living with her father, her stepmother, and her half brother.
Hmm.
We don't really get to know exactly what happened to her mother. We
Right.
don't,
I didn't hear talk about that.
because you'd have to look really close. You have to look at the details. There's pictures that she has of her mother, and she's with you know a person that looks like David Bowie, of course. um, and there's news clippings, she was a stage actress and she fell in love with their co-star. So we don't know if she's alive or dead, but it's pretty much hinted to that she left, her father and her, for this new love.
It kind of sounds familiar. Mother died, stage actress.
And yeah, I mean it's happened before, right? I mean,
Don't talk about
well,
Manny. Same thing.
oh.
Manny's
Well,
confused.
her mother might not be dead. Well, like I said,
Right.
I didn't see any news clippings saying she passed away.
Right.
So, the hint is like she basically abandoned her family for a new love, you know.
Or the father got tired of her and he wanted a younger, newer model, which
Um,
probably happens.
so this image, she sees this guy that lured her mother away from her,
Right.
So this image of David Bowie, is the image of what a perfect man is,
Mhm.
and that's why the Goblin King looks like David Bowie, because that was her imagination of what a perfect man is, because
Right.
he was able to have the power to take her mother away from her, right?
Right.
And then at the end, she realizes, that that's all fantasy. The veil's removed. There was no power over that, and she just understands that, you know, things happen, and she's got to take responsibilities for now and
Right.
come up with her own views,
Right.
and
And
a lot of people were saying it's like, oh, it's creepy to have that kind of romance between older David Bowie and, I mean, like we said, Jennifer Connelly was 14 at this time, but she was playing a 16-year-old, when it's like, well, it's all in her imagination. And like I said, that was her image of
right.
what a perfect love, man to
Right.
love would be. But at the end, like I said, she comes to reality and understands things more, and that's the things that it goes deep. There's a lot of little hints in there, and there's like explanations for that, explanations why David Bowie is that opposite. And there was a lot of people that were considered for the role that were probably just the same age. Sting was considered, and I think Sting was a lot younger than David Bowie was at that time.
Hmm.
So I remember he was in the Dune movie. He was looking pretty young.
Right.
Um,
It said Michael Jackson too, wasn't it?
yeah, Michael Jackson. Michael Jackson would have been pretty young in '86.
Yeah.
That was probably around the time he did like the Oz film, right? So I mean, he was
Right.
20 something. He's still older. The character would always something older, but I think they chose really correctly. David Bowie has like this great soothing voice, in his music. I remember seeing when he was on the late night show, or Conan and Brian's first show, back early '90s, late '80s, and they just had him read like, you know, uh, kid stories, tickery tickery talk, right? And he would just read it. It's like, oh man, that's just great, right?
Right. Right. Yeah, he's a great personality, great singer.
Yeah, and there's a bunch of fan theories, and that's what tends to make it. Once a film goes into cult classic, people really dive deep into it, right? They get involved in the characters. Like I said, you don't get much on the Goblin King story, because you're just saying, okay, it's all in her imagination, right? So whatever story that she was reading as a kid that this character came from, that's what his backstory was. But that question is like, okay, is it all in her mind, or could it possibly be somewhat real? And if it's possibly something real, then well, then this Goblin King's got a backstory. He's been driven something before.
Hmm.
And the great fan theory is that, well, he was in love with a dark-haired woman called Sarah, and she died, and he's been trying to find a replacement, a new queen. And all these goblins that he's in, the king of, were all once babies, because he's done the same thing to other women called Sarah before, right? And they didn't make it, so their brother or their baby became a goblin over time, just like Toby would have been, right? Um,
Interesting.
so it's very interesting, very interesting, very deep if you start really diving into it. There's a
Right.
lot underneath the puppetry, and besides mechanical mechanisms, and
Right.
um
Who wrote the original? Oh, Terry. The
Terry Jones with the original script, and it got
right.
rewritten by a couple other people, but
Right.
Terry Jones had to be brought back to like put all the jokes back in.
Okay. So we have to. I guess to, I guess really find out more about what you're talking about. It to go back to the original screen and what his motivations were. That's really interesting. Yeah, that'd be something to do a deep dive into the motivation of the original script. You know.
And I think the motivation of the original script was pretty much possibly the same, but it was organized a lot differently.
Yeah.
Like I said before, Terry Jones didn't like the way that the script actually showed the center of the maze, before the end of the film.
Right.
Before she got there, before Sarah's character got there, it's like, well, why show the middle? Well, it's like, well, like I said, he had David Bowie in there, so you got to show him.
Right.
And that's what he didn't like. So he probably wrote almost exactly what it was, but it was in a different order,
Yeah.
maybe a few things different, and then probably had less of the Goblin King in there. Um, but they did just such a great job playing with that. You know, I always bring up like the usual suspects. It seems like they size their corset it, right? Because all
Mhm.
the creatures that you see in the film were like stuffed animals or other things in her room. You know, there was a scene with like the Escher, stairs, and stuff like that where she had a poster of the Escher, you know, the stairs going up way
Right,
and
right, right, right,
that crazy room, and that looked fantastic. It's like writing that, in the studio had to be insane, you
right,
know, using all those practical effects and using, you know, just simple tricks, camera tricks that have been around for a while, where when he throws that glass ball and it goes up the stairs into the
right.
kid's hands, like, well, yeah,
As
you
yeah,
just
they
film,
shot it reverse, right? Yeah,
yeah, you just
yeah,
film in reverse. Really
right.
simple, right? Um, in talking about the glass balls, it's like, he does a lot of tricks, moving those balls around his hands. Like that wasn't CGI, it wasn't even David Bowie doing it. They literally treated him like a puppet.
Oh,
They had a guy standing behind him, had his arms under there, and that was someone
oh,
else's arms moving the
oh,
crystals.
it's like the banjo and what's that movie with Ned Beatty? Oh, I can't think of the name of the movie. Yeah, it's been done before, right?
Yeah, yeah, they're just simple tricks that have been done before and to get things done, limitations like, hey, yeah, we don't need to hire someone that can actually do that, you know, but it is something that was really interesting to see when he was doing it. It's like, oh man, is that real? Is it not? It's like, yeah, it was absolutely someone doing it.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, and it was funny because Henson and the producer they were talking about the worst scenes to film in a movie or scenes with animals, puppets,
And
and
kids.
babies.
Yeah, right. Yeah, they have all three.
And there was only like one scene that didn't have any of those,
Right.
and I think it was like the ballroom masquerade party dancing scene.
Hmm.
That was the only time that there was no puppets, no babies, and no animals in it.
Yeah, it was
And the
interesting.
funny thing is I never noticed it before, because I was a lot younger and the quality of the viewing screens were always worse, back
Right.
then. But there was times when the dog was a dog and then the dog was actually a puppet.
Oh, okay.
So when the little fox character, he had the riding dog as a steed, there was times where it was a real dog, and then there's times where it's like it's actually a puppet, and they have it shake and it's kind of like, being afraid and stuff like that. It's like, oh, now I can tell that's definitely not real dog here. That's definitely a puppet. And that was something it's like, yeah, I didn't really realize that, especially, like I said, lower quality film,
Right,
seen
right,
on
right.
VHS, looking at it on a
Well,
smaller
yeah,
screen,
your
you
eyes
weren't
have
really attached
changed.
to
I mean,
that most of these
your
scenes.
viewing eyes have changed. You're looking for things that make sense or don't make sense. Yeah, when
And
you're
then
young,
might have wondered back then, it's like, man, how do they get that animal to do that? It's like, oh yeah, okay, now I get
right?
it.
It was a
It was
puppet.
just a really pretty good puppet, especially back then. But you can't fool, 4K HD or whatever
Right,
nowadays. It's like,
right.
yeah,
Things
you
have changed,
definitely
right?
see it now. But a lot of the stuff, like I said, still lives up. Those goblins looked really great.
Oh
Hoggle,
yeah, they're spooky looking. Yeah, they
yeah,
were.
Hoggle looked pretty good. We could probably do better nowadays with, mm, you look at something like what the Hobbit, had a lot of like CGI goblins and orcs and stuff like that. It's like, man, I don't even think they looked as good as these puppets,
Right.
you know. And of course, you got to worry about the size and stuff like that. But man, I mean, what they did back in '86 was crazy. You know, even they had the first rendition of a photorealistic animal at the very beginning, the owl.
Hmm. Oh,
And
right,
that
right.
looked pretty good
Yeah,
for 86.
right. Yeah.
Did it look like a photorealistic owl? No. But the transition from the CG owl to a real owl was really smooth, and it even looks better than some, computer game graphics that are like, since last time I played, 5, 10 years ago, it looked just as good as that.
Hmm.
I mean, it was pretty sharp and pretty clear looking, pretty animated, which nowadays we could probably make a photorealistic owl CGI, and
Hmm.
you probably couldn't tell the difference. You know, um, you've seen some like the CGI, like really, really high res. There's some humans, that you can actually get pretty close.
Hmm.
I think what was that one guy using a iClone, right? That was several years ago. The
Oh,
more
yeah.
renders it goes through, it's
Right.
like,
Yeah.
you can't really
Yeah.
tell.
The better it get. Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm glad that it got a cult following afterwards because it deserved one. Like I said, it's a lot deeper than it is on the surface.
Hmm.
And on the surface, it is pretty. I mean, it's kind of straightforward on the surface. Just like I said, the hero's journey. It's very simple. It's mostly, Jennifer Connelly's character and a bunch of puppets. And they did what, $25 million that they probably spent all that money on puppets and sets.
Yeah.
Some of those sets were pretty massive.
Right.
You know, uh, in the beginning, you get a lot of those kind of old school 60s sets, that you would see like on Star Trek or something like that,
Hmm.
where they're probably just in a 10 by 10 or 20 by 20, and they got a lot of sand, dead tree,
Right. Right. Right.
something very simple. But once you start getting into like the labyrinth and you have a bunch of shrubbery and stuff like that, that Escher, scene where it's like, man, it's all those stone steps and walls and doorways and
Hmm.
upside down stairs and stuff like that. It's like, man, that had to be built somehow, to visually get that, and the stone perspective sculpture of David Bowie's half his face, that yeah, it has to line perfectly. And when you move the camera, they're just stones, right? It's like, man, they did a lot of set building that looked really
Right.
amazing.
Right. Right. Yeah. Very. Yeah. Very elaborate. That's yeah. That I think, as we said, that and the puppets. Yeah. Would probably eat up a lion's share of that money. 25 million. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure David Bowie got paid a good chunk of change too. Yeah, I mean, he was a pretty big star at that time,
Hmm.
you know. But like I said, yeah, puppetry, and then probably the people running the puppets. Like, that, like I said, that one scene with the magic dance song, like 52 puppeteers were being used
Hmm.
during that one scene.
Yeah.
And it was dealing with a musical performance. So, you've seen shooting a musical performance before. He's like, you're going to go through that several times.
Right.
Shooting a
Yeah.
music video, how many times did we go through like that song that one day?
Right.
Some of the
It takes
people
a
are
lot.
like, oh man, I'm getting tired of this song because they've had to do the whole song over and
Over and
over and
over.
over
Yeah.
again, right?
Yeah. That's 52 people to manage. That's a big task.
Damn, a huge task, and CGI isn't as big as it was, nowadays. You can't just say we'll fix something in post. If something happens, you either have to run with that or let's do another take,
Hmm.
right? Or always get cutaways. That you can solve yourself, help
Right.
yourself with
Right.
always getting cutaways of some things, right?
Right.
But yeah, I mean, it is an impressive feat. Just going in there watching it for Jim Henson's magic. I mean, if you enjoy anything Jim Henson, like Dark Crystals or the Muppets, it's like you're gonna find appreciation for this
Yeah.
because they are top notch.
Hmm.
I mean, even though the turtles are probably the most technical, and that was just their heads, right?
Hmm.
In here, it's like, man, yeah, like I said, 52 puppeteers going at one time. It's like directing all those people and getting everything done and correctly. It's like
Right. Yeah. And the
insane,
timing and such, right?
insane. Or even like, the scene with like she's falling down, after going through the door and all those hands are grabbing her.
Hmm.
And that's an effect that's been done before, but there was 100 different hands there in that shaft.
Right.
So I mean they could have had just like what, several dozen and then just refilming that.
Right.
But
Right.
no,
Right.
I mean they had some kind of well structure or some kind
Right.
of like, cylinder that she can go down and there was 100 different hands coming out,
Yeah. It's interesting, right?
So doing everything practical, doing everything, it just makes it look more respectable, and I just enjoyed it. I still enjoy it. I enjoyed it as a kid and I enjoy it now. And I love going deeper into the story. Like I said,
Yeah. I'm
learning
gonna rewatch
about
it
the
with
people's
a different.
theories about the Goblin King, diving deep into, what happened to her mother, with the clues and stuff like that, and really gets into this really more in-depth psyche of what this teenager was going through.
Right.
It wasn't just, the spoiled little brat. It's not fair all the time. It's like, well, it's more about, growing up, taking on responsibilities, pathing your own, your own way, making your own way,
Right.
And at the end, you kind of have that where it's like she starts putting, she puts away the picture of her mother, she puts away the book and stuff like that, where it's like, she's putting away that childhood imagination, but the characters show up in a room where it's like, yeah, you need to grow up, you need to not forget about your childhood, but you can't like live in your childhood. You need to grow up, and you have this responsibility, but don't lose that childhood imagination.
Right. Right.
It can always be there for you, but don't let it control you. Don't let it be your whole world, but don't
Right.
also let it completely
Don't
go.
you forget about it. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that was kind of like a perfect allegory for Jim Henson, who made a living with imagination, with puppets,
Hmm.
things like that, So I really appreciate the connection that Jim Henson must have had with this project. And I can feel for him how he did get really down when this movie flopped because it was probably a really personal project for him.
Right.
Um, but I'm glad it got, like I said, the cult following afterwards because it deserved it because it is a special movie, especially when the things that go on, behind the scenes, how deep the project is for him, and all the like really good psychological things with the characters because it shows that there was a lot of effort and a lot of work that went into this film that on the surface looks like a very simple hero story, fantasy story.
Right. Yeah. Definitely. I'll give it another a watch during daylight hours so I don't fall asleep.
Yeah, and, like I said, if it's got that Monty Python British kind of humor written by, someone who doesn't write slapstick stuff. So,
Right.
it it's gonna have to be. It's like, yeah, you got to pay attention a little bit more to the like this
Right.
comedy
Right.
and what they're saying. Yeah, and when you're doing that, you're kind of like, okay, yeah, you chuckle almost at, every scene or every other scene. You're gonna get a chuckle out of.
Right.
You know,
I promise I'll rewatch it.
yeah. So I recommend it. It's a good family film. Like I said, go into it knowing that it's a lot deeper than you think it is.
Right. Well,
And
now that I know that, I should have listened before.
yeah, I didn't want to give you too much details when you watch it because I knew you hadn't seen it before, or you did, but it's a long time ago. And when you go into it and you're thinking like, oh, it's just a Jim Henson film. It's
Right.
like you watch the Muppets, and it's like the Muppets are pretty much, at least I haven't gone back and watched it as when I'm an adult,
I love the
But to
Muppets.
me, the Muppets were pretty surface level. What you
Right,
see is what you got, right?
right. Well, that's all my brain can take in. That's just like
Yeah. Yeah. I
I
mean,
can't take in too much.
Kermit sang the song, It's Hard to Be Green. It's like, okay, that's probably as deep as it goes because he,
Right,
being green, I mean, being green doesn't even mean you're feeling down, right? I mean, being
right,
green is like usually envy. He
right.
never saying, he feels blue.
I love the
It's hard to be
Muppets.
blue.
I'm
So
one
it
of the
always
two
seems
guys in the
surface. This
balcony.
one was a lot deeper, and at the time I didn't know Terry Jones was from Monty Python, who wrote the script. So even
Hmm.
going back, I can see the humor is like, okay, yeah,
Yeah, I had no idea. So I read
it's a
your
little bit
notes. But
smarter humor than I thought it was.
well, so I'll give it a 2.5 slices of pizza.
I'm gonna be a little bit more things on you. I'll give it a 4. Like I said, it wasn't the best out of like the fantasy kind of like fairy tales. I mean, they showed pictures of like the book of like Wizard of Oz and Snow White. So that's what they was going for. He was going for that kind of like modern fairy tale.
Yeah.
Um, to get that, if you want to watch a modern fairy tale type of story, I say watch, The Princess Bride.
Hmm.
That
Yes,
was
that's a good
really,
one.
really good. I
That
think
I've
that one was
watched.
Mel Brooks, huh?
No, not Mel. Who produced that?
Was it Mel Brooks?
I don't
I don't know,
know.
man. We'll have to put that one on the list
Yeah,
and
put that
we'll
on the
watch
list.
it.
Yeah, that's a good
You
one. Because
know,
my favorite actor,
um,
Andre the Giant, isn't it?
yeah, Andre Giant was in there. Um, but I do think it was better than like the Never Ending Story book.
I never
And
saw
I
that.
watched that one probably more than this film back in the day. But I think Labyrinth is actually a superior film than the Never Ending Story.
I'll take your word for it.
Oh, what? You never seen the Never Ending Story?
No,
I'll have to make you watch that one too.
no, please, no.
All right, David. Well, not sure what we're gonna do next week. We'll figure that one
We'll
out.
figure
We'll
something
come up
out.
with something.
We'll come up with something, right?
But you can catch us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts,
iHeartRadio.
iHeartRadio, YouTube,
We need to go to
Amazon.
TikTok.
I
We need to
can't
go to
remember.
TikTok.
We were check us out on Spotify for sure. Leave us some comments. We'd love to hear from you guys. We'd love to hear from like movies that you've seen that you would like to hear us talk about. And is that all, Dave? I think that's all.
That's all. That's it.
All right, David. We'll see you next
All
week.
right, buddy. We'll see you next time.